ask any questions as we go through today's session. You can either unmute your line or drop any of the questions you have in the chat box. Again, welcome to returning subgrantees and new subgrantees. As usual, the state of Tennessee does not currently permit the use of generated AI tools such as OtterBox in meetings hosted on state resources. While the state supports your desire to maintain documentation of the meeting and what we learn, please respect the decision to safeguard information that and not use any of the devices. So for today's agenda, we're going to recap the purpose of the McKinney-Vento subgrant. We're going to look at returning subgrantees and completing the FY25 FER. We will look at the new FY26 subgrant application for budgeting guidelines and allowable use of funds. The timeline, we'll look at the timeline of the subgrant requirements. I will discuss mid-year review and closeout report, and we will look at the new quarterly call and office hour schedules. And then finally, we'll look at the department's McKinney-Vento homeless program monitoring requirements, along with the posters and some related documents. Again, please feel free to unmute your line or drop questions you have in the chat box. So again, all of you had to complete the application, but let's just do a quick review of the purpose. The purpose of the McKinney-Vento subgrant is to facilitate the enrollment, attendance, and success in schools of homeless children and youth. And the subgrant guidelines are services provided cannot replace regular academic programming. Services must be designed to expand upon or improve the school's regular academic programming. So you're thinking of those when you're going back to your budgets, when you're looking at building out your programming. Those are the things that you need to keep in mind. So we are currently on the first year of the subgrant grant cycle, and you'll get, you already have your funding for year one. Year two, we'll get another pot of funding, along and then 3 year, another pot of funding. This is subgrantees will receive allocations in each year. So whatever you had this year may or may not be the same amount you get next year. Again, it's all depending on what the U.S. Department of Education awards to states. And so it's something to consider when you're looking at your budgets, if you're looking at staffing, things like that. Each year may be a different amount, may go up or lower. Again, depends on, it also depends on if districts decide that that was too much funding and they want to decrease, then we may have more money to distribute after year one. So there's things to consider when you're looking at the grant. So quickly, it's just quickly look over FY25 if you're a returning subgrantee. Next year, subgrantees will be required to do this for FY26, but for FY25, you'll have to do your final expenditure, which is your FER, in order for funds to carry over into FY26. All expenditures incurred between the day the funds were awarded and through June 30 of 2025. That's the budget that you're looking for when you're doing your FERs. The FERs must be completed by October 1, 2025 in E-Plan. And liaison should work with their local education agency or their LEA's fiscal team to ensure the FER is complete. For more detailed instructions on completing the FER, you can find it on the link that was provided on the slide. And if you don't know, the way I've presented today, you're able to click the links right now while we're discussing the information. And so you will be drawing any FY26 funds until your FY20 funds have been, your FER has been completed. And that is when you'll start drawing down your FY25 funds if there's any to carry over. Okay, so let's look at the FY26 McKinney-Vento subgrant application. So some things that you will notice is the liaison should submit the initial budget and E-Plan by August 30th. I've had a few that have come in already. there is the revisions needed. So if maybe you've got an email back from me, or maybe I haven't sent it back yet, if you got a revision back, you will need to make an adjustment. As you can see on the slide here, we had to turn on the the page where you can make but narrative revisions that will align with your budget. So now you will have to click both the top button, and then if you see if you need to make changes to your application, you'll see it right there checked off. That is where, if you're trying to make changes based on the approved application and what you're doing in your budget, and it's a major change, that is where you'll need to make any changes. And that is throughout the year. If midway through the year you decide that you need to make a budget change, and you need to revise the application, you'll need to go in and complete the questions, and then it'll need to be approved by the department before the funding will be available if you need to make adjustments. So when we're looking at budgets, again, you want to remember that your budget narrative should be detailed enough to show that the items and amounts that are budgeted are allowable, reasonable, and necessary. And in each, the implement for providing implementation of the grant activities. Reasonable means the proposed goods and services are not excessive in cost. So if you're looking at maybe, I've had questions about if a computer, purchasing a computer for a student that's going off to college, would that be allowable? Well, you got to look at, is it reasonable? If you're looking at spending $500 on one student, is that going to be, is that the amount you have set for your per pupil amount? If your per pupil amount is $30 and you're wanting to spend $500 for one student, it's probably not going to be reasonable. Necessary, or the goods and services that are essential for carrying out the grant. Is that going, the item you're purchasing or the things that you're requesting, are they going to be part of supporting your homeless programming to ensure that it's not supplanting? These goods and services support the things that you have in your needs assessment, in your budget, and in your application. And then allocable, making sure that you have the benefit of the grant that meets the intent and objective of the subgrant. And again, looking back to allowability, to supporting your homeless programming, and not supplanting and giving additional support to these homeless students. If you're doing positions, make sure that you're concluding position titles and full-time equivalents in your narratives to ensure that they show that you're providing an FTE, and then make sure that aligns with the page on personnel system-wide or wherever that person's going to be located. They both need, the budget narrative needs to align with that page as well. Okay, so looking at your budget narrative requirements. A good budget narrative should be specific enough to determine the allowability and reasonableness of the expenditure. Again, I mentioned supplemental. How is this going to be supplemental to your programming? Have you looked at other resources that you can get using community-based organizations, using other resources before relying on your McKinney-Vento subgrant? And if you do use that, how is it going to help your programming? How is it going to build out your programming and support your students? What items are being purchased? Again, like if you're buying, backpacks, is that something that you could have gotten from a community-based organization versus spending your money for backpacks, right? Is that something that maybe is allowable under McKinney-Vento that maybe your organization's not able to provide to you? So look at that. How many of the items are you going to need to purchase? Again, if you're looking at buying supplies, are you going to purchase enough for the beginning of the school year? Are you doing it for the whole year? For McKinney-Vento, we obviously don't want to buy and then have reserve for 2 or 3 years, right? We're looking at immediately supporting homeless students and buying materials that are necessary in the time frame for the school year. And then you want to consider what activities are being funded. Are you using this money for transportation? Are you using it for extracurricular activities? Um, Again, you got to sit down and look at your needs assessment, talk with your homeless programming team, and see what kind of activities you're going to try to use these funds for. What students are needing the targeted services. If you're having to work with your SPED department, how is McKinney-Vento going to support those students and what services are going to be provided? When will all these activities take place? All the things that you need to consider in your budget, right? Like if you're doing stipends, it's important to remember stipends are only for after or before hours. Like you cannot use a stipend for during work hours because that person is hired on, is already being paid through another pay source. And so you have to look at when these stipends or when these people or staff are going to be working with the homeless programming. And then again, if you're contracting these services, do you have all of your contracts in place? Everything, you'll provide this service, the contracted community-based organization will provide these services, and making sure that it's a clear MOU on what services will be provided to your homeless programming. Are you using these funds for professional development? If you are, if you're paying for things outside of the NAEYC conference, how much of that conference is really going to be based on directly for students experiencing homelessness? If you're attending a guidance counselor conference, are there tracks for McKinney-Vento students? If there's not specific tracks for McKinney-Vento students, then that's going to be a general student population need and not necessarily McKinney-Vento. If you do go to a webinar where it's mostly homeless tracks, or even half of the sessions are homeless, you might look at doing partial funding out of McKinney-Vento. When budgeting funds for supplies and materials, include the details about how they will be purchased, including examples of all equipment, materials, and supplies, and how they will be used. So if you're buying furniture, for example, a table for your homeless center, how is there not another table somewhere in the school that could be used for this center that you're setting up for students? If they're not, then specify, this is a new area we're setting up, and we would like to buy a table to enable computer station, and make sure those details are in there so that when we're reviewing the budgets, the team's reviewing the budgets, they understand clearly what your intent is. When budgeting funds for professional development, again, please provide those details, including what will be provided, exactly what will be purchased, if it's conference registration, PD materials, stipends, etc., travel, all of those things, those need to be included in the budget as well. Again, while I know a lot about McKinney-Vento, some of the team here, they're not necessarily specifically for a first round review McKinney-Vento, but they do a first round review of allowability, and then it comes up to me for final. So just ensure that they also can tell what you're doing with these funds. So let's talk a little bit about allowable use of funds. Again, looking at your needs assessment, looking at your application and what you said you're going to do with these funds. You can do tutoring. You can, as long as what you're providing is supplemental instruction, right? If your LEA is already providing tutoring in the morning for all students, then McKinney-Vento cannot pay for the tutoring of the students that are experiencing homelessness from morning tutoring. However, if your afternoon session, your school doesn't do that, then you can provide that additional service for those students. Again, professional development, that is an allowable expense. If you're providing the PD, then you can pay for your staff to provide that PD if they need to travel to schools, travel to provide that professional development. It's allowable. And then, of course, on the other side of things, you're also permitted to attend homeless-related conferences. Again, you'll have to show how that is that there are tracks for supporting your need to attend. And then referral services. Again, McKinney-Vento cannot pay for actual medical services such as dental work, but they can be used for referrals for medical, dental, and mental health referrals. McKinney-Vento does say that you can use the funds for glasses, hearing aids, those items, but not direct medical items such as medicine or actual treatments. Those are things that you'll need to work with your community-based organizations to help get those services paid for. And then remembering when your transportation, the point of the transportation is to defray the excess cost of transportation, right? And so if you're having to reroute your yellow school bus and rerouting that is adding some additional transportation costs to that reroute, then that is where you will pay that difference for that student. If there's no additional cost to what already is being charged for each student to transport them on the traditional yellow school bus, then there's no excess cost and you can't be using transportation for that. Of course, there's also the means of transportation through outside uses of, share ride, local meta buses, things like that. Anything you do for transportation, you definitely need to ensure that you're looking at your LEA policy and procedure. If it is allowable for you to use a vehicle that is not a yellow school bus. You also need to ensure that you have your policies and procedures in place to what is going to be offered. Some LEAs do not allow for share ride use. Some LEAs do. If you have any questions before you purchase a vehicle, if that's something you're planning on doing and splitting the cost, I know a lot of LEAs don't have enough funding to purchase a vehicle, but if you decide that you want to braid funds to be able to purchase an LEA homeless program vehicle, that is allowable, but you need to ensure that your LEA also allows for a car or vehicle to be purchased. And then you also need to check the state guidelines to ensure that it is any passenger van that's larger than 9 is not allowable and cannot transport students. So ensuring that you're looking at all state guidance on that, your LEA guidance on that, and then we recommend that you always talk with your LEA board attorney when it comes to liability, insurance, and things like that. Funds can be used for developmentally appropriate early childhood education programs, not otherwise provided through federal, state, or local funds for your preschool age children. As a reminder, under McKinney-Vento, any preschool program or Head Start program that is run through the LEA, through the actual district, services must be provided to those children above and beyond what's already been provided through Head Start and the preschool program. That includes transportation. So again, if it's an LEA authorized program, again, go back to working with your board attorney and your policies and procedures. I know there's a lot of questions around transporting children under a certain age. So ensure that you followed all of those guidelines before setting up that transportation or whatever you may need to do. McKinney-Vento funds can be used to develop communication tools, resources, again, MOUs if you need to put those in place. Again, your best practice is to work with your local Head Start programs and collaborate with your pre-K programs and your early education programs. If you're not already, connecting with them, it's something to look at when you're looking at your budgets and what you may need to provide. McKinney-Vento funds can be used for the provision of homeless children and youth for before and after school programming, mentoring or summer programs. I know I saw in some of the budgets that have been submitted, there are success coaches that have been hired on to provide morning and afternoon support for these students. And then of course, if you need supervision of educational activities or homework assistance, those are all things that these funds can be used for to help those students. McKinney-Vento funds can be used for mentors. Again, like I said, the success coach to help them maybe with post-secondary applications, course selections, anything like that. Again, if you're paying them a stipend, it needs to be before or after school hours. And then other examples would be Maybe you do a morning meetup, like the success coach meets with the homeless student, maybe in the morning to make sure they have all their school supplies ready or anything that they may need for the day to be successful. Maybe they meet once a week, maybe it's once a month, however you decide that you want to incorporate that in your programming. Again, you can provide training to your community partners, making sure you develop your MOUs. A big piece of this is remembering that families that are fleeing domestic violence are also are protected under McKinney-Vento, need to provide services for them as well. And then you can adapt a space. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're setting up maybe a little center for unaccompanied homeless youth or families to come in and do work, that is allowable as long as you can show in your budget why you're purchasing what you're purchasing and the reasoning on how you're going to monitor that it's only being used by families that are experiencing homelessness. And then making sure that it's meaningful involvement, right? We're not just going to just be making a center and just putting stuff out there in general, like making sure it's meaningful, like families can really come in and use it and get supports from that. Again, school supplies, anything like that, it's allowable. Again, I would highly recommend that you look at your community organizations for your simple supplies, things that maybe you use your funding for things that maybe you cannot typically get from a community-based organization. And then, of course, the last one is extraordinary or emergency assistance. And typically when those come up, it is required for you to get pre-approval from the state, which you would just email me your situation. We'll talk through it. And based on the information provided, I will determine if it is going to be allowable, again, case by case. So maybe it's a family that's camping. There's something unique that you need for that particular case. Don't ever hesitate to reach out. We are a team and I'm here to work through any cases that you may have and budgeting for those situations. Oh, and I forgot to mention, all of this is in the non-regulatory guidance and you can find it in the toolkit as well. Something that just came out from the National Center for Homeless Education is now a new allowable activities tip sheet. I feel like it's a really good resource that you can look at to kind of walk through allowability. When you enter the document, if you scroll down to the second page, it actually gives you examples of how to talk through each one through I think it's 6 here, 1 through 6, and each of that level, what to consider when you're working through allowability. What about emergency housing? Is it allowable? Housing is still not allowable. That will be something you'll have to use with your community-based organization. Unfortunately, even case by case, that is something we have not been allowed to approve. It's a great question. All right, so let's look at any other questions before we move on to the timeline. So just a quick look at the subgrant timeline, good things to put in your calendars. Of course, for August, you have your August 1, the FERS, or you can start putting those in ePlan. And then August 30th is when all final FY26 McKinney-Vento budgets should be submitted to the department. If there are any questions around budgets or I need some revisions, again, like I said, we'll look at the checklist and send it back to what needs to be revised. In October, Thursday, October 30th, returning grantees will need to submit their FER for FY25. So you have time to still complete that. And then in November, I will be sending out information guidance on the mid-year performance review. And then also the mid-year performance review will open on November 21st. That's a Friday, so that you can begin working on that. And then in January, that's when your mid-year review will be due. And then we'll begin at the end of January, we'll begin calls with subgrantees. I will begin calls with subgrantees. And then in February, we'll continue those calls with anyone, with all current subgrantees. In June, again, we're looking at your closeout reports, though that will open on June 1. And the reason why it's opening on June 1 is these funds for FY26 are good until July 30th. And then, I'm sorry, through these funds are for June 1 through July. I'm getting all muddled. I'm sorry. My apologies. Tuesday, June 30th, the closeout report will be due in ePlan. So you'll only have a month. You'll need to ensure before you leave for the summer, if you're not a 12-month contractee, that you have that submitted. If you don't have that submitted, it could risk that you get less funding. It could impact your funding for the following fiscal year. And then in July, we have tentative on when we'll send out awards, depending on, again, what comes out with the U.S. Department of Education. Tentatively, we should be telling you awards on July 18th and then loading those in at the end of July. All right, so let's look at monitoring and reports. So the mid-year report is really the performance review is to really look at your homeless programming and look at what you have in your budget, what you have in your narratives, and if it's working, look at that. Sit down and talk with your team. If it's not working, like if there needs to be some adjustments to your budgeting, to your narratives, and really looking at the program to see where you are. You can go ahead and look at the mid-year performance review guide and ePlan to kind of get an idea on how to complete that. And then here is a screenshot of what it looks like. Again, you're going to be determining if you're exceeding your goal, if you're making your goal, if you're making progress towards your goal, or not making progress at all, right? And so when we have our calls, we'll go through this and we'll talk about what some ideas of how we can move you out of not making progress and pushing up to maybe making your goal. And then we'll also talk about maybe things that you would like to see from the department. We'll talk about things that are going on in your programming. Just time for you and I to meet and talk about what's going on and how we can shift things if they need to be shifted. Really, we're open up to any kind of discussion during our call. If you have any questions, this is time to ask and we can figure out a way to support. Your closeout report is just that. We're closing out our application for FY26, and we're going to be reflecting back on the homeless programming for the year and how things went, and what your funding may look like, your funding needs for the next school year. So this is a time to reflect and say hey, this was too much funding. We were not able to spend it all. Hey, I need more money. Typically, we need more funding. Again, it's based on what we get. Our award is from the U.S. Department of Education. We do not meet at the end of the year for a call. This is just simply completing the report. And then if I have any questions, I will, ask those questions. But typically, this is how we're going to gauge funding for the next school year. And this is what the closeout report looks like. Again, you're going to be looking at your data. You're going to be looking at questions. If you've done any disputes, if you've had any transportation agreements, if you did any tutoring, anything like that, we document it here. And it lets us kind of know where you are with following some of those federal requirements. Any questions? Okay, so we had a question in my original application. I requested 2 positions, but I only received enough funding for 1. On the new fiscal year assurances on the budget change form and ePlan, do I need to note the revision? I'm doing what I'm asked for, but just with fewer people. No, that you're not necessarily you're still planning on hiring people. So you're not making a big change in your application. You're just not hiring as many people or funding as many people. So no, that would not be something that would need that change.
Vanessa, this is Christy in Putnam. I got a question for you.
Yes.
Okay, well, I guess I got a couple. On the conference approvals, like let's just say half of the conference pertains to the homeless population and the other half doesn't. So I don't care to pay for half of that with the homeless, but do we need to send in an individual approval for each one of those conferences for you to say how much it'll cover?
No, you also have to be able to, for auditing purposes, if they come in and say, hey, we want to see this agenda for this conference that you paid for with McKinney-Vento, and they look at it and they don't see a track for homelessness, they only see like one track for homeless, then they may question using, hundreds of dollars to attend this conference. And something that we also like, for when I'm seeing the budgets, if I'm asking for more information, or if I'm saying, no, you can't go to that conference, there's not enough homeless tracks on that. If you can send me information that says otherwise, then it could possibly be approvable, even if it's not 100% funded through McKinney-Vento. But again, you'll have to be able to show that agenda, and then the team will determine if there's enough of those homeless tracks in order to pay for 25%, 50%, whatever we're asking out of those funds.
Okay. The other question I have is for uploading our registration forms for children, ours are all online now. And so are you okay with just a screenshot showing that like the Social Security number is optional?
Yes, that is fine.
Okay. And on transportation, I generally only end up with one or two a year. For some odd reason, they may go stay in a campground or something out of our county. And so if they do that and they're still attending here, I'm still okay to provide a gas card or whatever to get them to where our bus can grab those kids?
Yes. Store cards, gas cards are still allowable. If it was allowable on ARP Homeless, most of that is now going to be allowable with McKinney-Vento Subgrant. So yes, store cards, gas cards are allowable. Again, you're going to show how you're going to track that you are giving these gas cards to families, right? You're not, if you're handing them a gas card, like how are you going to track that's being used properly? So that's really all you're going to have to provide for that piece of it.
Okay, I just use the state form for mileage for those families. So, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So let's look at policies and procedures. Of course, under the federal law, you are tasked to remove those barriers to identification for homeless children and youth, and for enrollment and retention, right? And so if your district does have some barriers, for example, Chrissy just mentioned Social Security. If your enrollment information has required for a birth certificate or Social Security number, then that's a barrier that you need to work to get removed, right? And simply to remove that barrier, simply you're going to write on your enrollment form that Social Security is optional. Birth certificate is optional. And those are some barriers, again, that you're tasked to remove. Those are also barriers that when the federal programs is doing monitoring, if we see some of those barriers, that will be a finding of non-compliance, right? And so your task as homeless liaisons to ensure that your programming has those barriers removed. And that's just a minor piece of it, but it's important that you look at those documentations. Removing those barriers. If you have your district requires that fees and fines and be paid, how are you going to remove that barrier from your district, right? Like for your homeless programming and those students, because it can't be required for them to pay those fees. Now you can just like pay it out of your subgrant funding, but if you can work with your district to remove that barrier, that is more funds that you can use in other places for programming. So again, that is part of the federal law to remove those barriers. And then here's a great checklist that I found at Schoolhouse Connection. They have a lot of wonderful information. Just remember that Schoolhouse is a nonprofit. NCHE is the official TA supporter of homeless education through the U.S. Department of Education. However, Schoolhouse Connection has a lot of wonderful information. Here is a policy checklist that I recommend you go look at and sit down with your team and look at what you have in your district, and what could possibly be a barrier within that policy that you have. So again, it's not required, but just take a look at it and see maybe how you can start by looking at some of those policies that your district has in place. For your dispute resolution process, that is one of the related documents that is required for the McKinney-Vento subgrant. In reviewing some of those, we are still not quite up to par with the dispute. So here's an example. The TDOE state level resolution process is an e-plan. If you don't already have this, I highly recommend that you go take a look at it. It is really just taking out where you see the red writing, taking that out and putting it into your tailored LEA and removing the logo up here at the top of TDOE and putting in your LEA letterhead. Having this in place not only is a best practice for you and making sure that you're following the dispute process, but it also is federally required when we look at monitoring. If you do not have your dispute with a full timeline, it will be a finding of noncompliance. If it is not on LEA letterhead, then that would be a recommendation again. So just getting ahead of it and looking at your dispute, ensuring that it aligns with the state. Federal law says that you can do your own dispute, but it must align with the states. And so, for example, levels 1 and 2 are at the LEA level. Level 3 is the state level. The state's process says that the district will send information from the LEA, including information from the parent, to the state. And not the parent sending it to the state. So it needs to come directly from the LEA in order for it to go through the level 3 and 4 process. Again, as I do in all of the webinars, here is a screenshot of the dispute resolution brief that has been put out by NCHE. I know it's about 3 or 4 pages long, but if you have the time, we'll talk through the best way to go through a dispute and federally what you're required to do. So take the time to look at that. Again, it's a best practice to have an MOU in place. I know that everyone has an actual transportation policy that is required by the district, but having a specific MOU, and this will help when it comes to parents, like understanding, like this is our policy here at the district. We use this transportation form, and it tells them directly exactly what to expect from the district and what is required of the parent when it comes to this transportation. You'd be surprised at how many districts don't have a specific transportation MOU in place for families. They just kind of go, lack of a better word here, by the seat of their pants. And then sometimes it doesn't work out as they thought it would. So highly encouraged to sit down and look at getting a MOU in place. Again, you can use the template that's provided by the state. Anywhere you see red, just take that out and fill it in for your LEA need. Here are some examples of, if you want to do your own MOU, some examples of how you can create one. Think about if you're doing share ride or taxi, again, if it's allowed in your LEA, what's going to be your policy and procedure if a family needs to call into a certain number to say, hey, we're not going to be riding the taxi today, or hey, we had a change in our pickup for this morning specifically. What are your requirements as a district, right? Federal law says that you're responsible for children attending school and participating fully. And that means also getting rid of those absences. So if a child's not coming to school, not because you haven't done your part, but because a parent is not following your transportation agreement that you guys have set up, then that could be part of having that MOU in place and saying, well, we've agreed to this, and this is what you need to do. We are required to have your children here, and you need to follow this MOU, right? And then once you've sat down and explained everything in detail with the parent, what are the consequences? if they don't, 4 rides of missing ever driven, that's $75 one way. That's a lot of money out of pocket, right? So do you have the right to cancel the agreement? Yes, you do. Again, you're required to get those children to school. A parent has to be able to work with you in order to get the services that you're providing. And if they don't, then you have it written in your agreement what will happen after so many times of not arriving to whatever has been agreed upon. Some important reminders, again, documentation, 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 not only for yourself, but for if you do have to go through a dispute. And it does make it up to the state level. Part of that is me looking into the information that's provided by the LEA on what they did to determine whatever the situation is, non-eligibility, school selection, anything like that. I need to see the evidence the LEA did for that particular investigation. So heavy documentation is going to support you guys in my decision making. Again, it's just a good practice to document things that are happening in your programming. Maybe it's not necessarily a dispute, but maybe just looking out there as a civil suit, you have all the information documented, right? It's not going to be a he said, she said type of situation. Making sure, again, that you have written policies and procedures for your identification. How are you going to do that in your district? How are you going to do your enrollment? How are you doing your best interest determination? Do you have a checklist that you use? Whatever you do for one family, you have to do for all families. It needs to be consistent so that no one can come back and say, well, you're prejudiced against my family. You say this is a policy that we use in our district. Of course, your transportation, we just talked about that, and your dispute resolution. You need to keep those on file. Again, you need to make sure the parents are informed of their right to dispute, and you have all the policies and everything written down for them. The new posters, we had initially planned to get those out at the FPI. However, that is now virtual. So we have shifted, and posters that were printed by the state will now be given out at the 2025 statewide special education and student support access conference, which is on October 28th and 29th. If you do not plan to attend yourself, please get with a team member. If it's your federal programs, your director of schools, whoever is going to be attending for your LEA, have them come by the registration table and pick up your packet of posters. You will get one poster for your central office and then one poster for each school in the LEA. If you continue to use the old posters, the old NCHE posters, you'll need to ensure that the NCHE information is updated on those old posters by simply putting a sticker over any contact information that's old. The numbers did change, and obviously the emails changed as well. If you want to go ahead and just print out some posters so that you have more than just one in each school, if you get the posters directly in ePlan, those already have my information already pre-set into the poster. And then again, you can always go to NCHE and get them, print them directly from the NCHE website. They no longer print them and send them to districts. So that's something now that districts will have to do on their own. Making sure that all my information is on there, my phone number or email, it can be both and making sure your contact information is on there as well, and that they're posted in a common area. We highly recommend the front office, and then anywhere else where there might be high traffic. And then again, this is a federal requirement. And so when we come in for monitoring, if your monitor is not able to find your posters, it will be a finding of non-compliance. So, and then having all the information has to have both contact information for it to be complete. Again, it says federally required that you have information on your LEA website or handbook. It has information about McKinney-Vento, who the homeless liaison is, things to help support them. So making sure that you have that. When we do our monitoring, our team does go and look at the websites and the handbooks to see if there's any mention of McKinney-Vento supports and who that contact person is. So please ensure that you have that on your websites or in your handbooks. And then lastly, some resources. Here is the quarterly call schedule. It is posted in ePlan. McKinney-Vento subgrantees are required to attend the quarterly calls. If you're not able, you can send an email to me so that I can document, but it is required as part of your application or part of you being a subgrantee. As you can see here, that Tuesday, August 26th is the annual McKinney-Vento training. It is mixed in with the FPI because they kind of fell in the same week. So there will be a special link sent out for the first quarterly call. It is during the FPI session. It is not at 10. It will start at 9:20 Central Time. Again, once I have the link from the team, I will send guidance out via email for everyone so they can attend this special FPI session. That is, again, the quarterly call. After that, you can see that we have a quarterly call in November, in February, and April. So go ahead and mark your calendars. I do record them and do post them in ePlan afterwards, but it is great if you attend so that you can be interactive and ask questions. And then, of course, our office hours. Highly encouraged, again, to join our office hours. We meet the first Thursday of the month, except for in January. That's going to be pushed out because the first Thursday is on January 1st. And everybody, I'm sure, will be enjoying New Year's Day. So again, these are required, and we highly recommend that you put that on your calendar and join when you can. And just so that I can share with you, so you can kind of see who has the subgrantee and where they are in the state, reach out to these homeless liaisons. You know, it takes a village to run your programming, and you might have questions. There are the new subgrantees along with current subgrantees or returning subgrantees, and they're across the state. We have a little in each part of the state and each region of the state. So again, don't hesitate to reach out to them if you have questions about programming and how they do it in their area. We have some very experienced homeless liaisons who've been doing it for a number of years, who are always willing to share what they're doing. And then for the newer homeless liaisons slash subgrantees, don't hesitate to ask. They are willing to share. There's no need to reinvent the wheel if they have already worked out some things that they're using in their homeless program. And lastly, your resources. These are some great resources. The non-regulatory guidance is a great place when you have questions. The National Center for Homeless Education, again, like I mentioned, NCHE is the official U.S. Department of Educational's technical assistance team. And so they are following directly what federal law is saying. Schoolhouse Connection, it has got wonderful resources, great webinars. They're a nonprofit, but also a great resource to use as well. And then, of course, like I mentioned, the NACE, which is the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth. They are the program that offers the annual conference, which you are required to attend either virtually or in person. Let's see here. We have a couple of questions I've missed in the chat. The table on transportation MOUs was very helpful. Oh, thanks, Catherine. Is that an ePlan? No, but this slide deck will be in ePlan, so you'll be able to access that once it's in ePlan. I'm trying to think. Yeah, this slide deck will be in ePlan, so it's not there yet, but it will be. Let's see. Will we have a joint meeting with transportation similar to last year? Dr. Hill, I don't know yet. I have not started planning regional meetings. I do plan on doing regional meetings in the spring just because I know this half of the school year is pretty full with conferences, FPI, all of those things. And so I thought it might be easier to move it out to the spring. So I will be sending out a survey to kind of get some feedback about which direction we want to go. But at this time, there's not anything planned for transportation. But if I get enough emails or responses, I can definitely put something in there, even if it's not in the regional meetings, but maybe just a virtual time to meet with transportation. Of course, I need some feedback, so please just take a few minutes to complete the survey. It'd be greatly appreciated. Any questions? Again, unmute your line, drop them in the chat box. And again, thank you guys for joining me today. I'm here to support however I can. If you do have more questions about related documents and you need me to specifically set some time to work with you on those, I'm happy to do that. Like I tell anyone, if I don't know the answer, I will get it for you. Please don't ever hesitate to email me and say like, hey, can you help me with this? Just push it back to the top of my inbox or call me and leave me a voicemail. Or a text message, whatever you feel comfortable doing. I'm here to support, and I'm looking forward to a new school year and working with you guys. So again, reach out and let me know if you need any assistance. Thanks again for joining.